Hello to everyone. Okay, let's look at a past GCE question on advanced level philosophy real quick, um, based on the request of some students. Okay, the question is, where the Sophist philosophers discuss? Where the Sophist philosophers discuss. Now, this question has to do with a group of philosophers who were teachers, and they were grouped under the Socratic period. They were grouped under the Socratic period, and they were a group of intellectual class teachers, as I rightly said. Now, when we talk of the Sophists, we are referring to Protagoras, Gorgias, Thrasymachus, Hippias. So, among the individuals who existed in ancient Greece at that time who had the title of a sophist, we had prominent among them were the four names that I've just listed: Protagoras, Gorgias, Thrasymachus, and Hippias. Now, according to the advanced level syllabus for Cameroon GCE, we are permitted to look at just the first three. That is Protagoras, uh, Gorgias, and Thrasymachus. Now, the question is asking if they were philosophers, were the sophist philosophers. Now, most students will be tempted to just answer yes or no, but with this question, you are expected to write a full-blown essay. And as I said in my previous videos, whenever you are asked a question in philosophy, it is always two-dimensional. You must look at it from two different dimensions, from two perspectives. So the question is asking if the sophists were philosophers. Now, the notion in the question is that the sophists were philosophers. So, at the level of your thesis, you must give arguments to prove that the sophists were actually philosophers. And now, at the level of your antithesis, you must give arguments to prove that these guys were not or should not be considered as philosophers. Now, the first part of the question: what justification can we give to prove that the sophists were philosophers? Now, it does not only suffice that we study them under philosophy. No, you must give a reason to prove that they were philosophers. And for me to give that reason, I will need to ask a question. Who is a philosopher? Now, if you know who a philosopher is, you can easily now determine if the sophists were philosophers. So therefore, who is a philosopher? Now, in the simplest terms, a philosopher is someone who asks critical questions about life and happenings in the universe, and then provides rational answers to these questions that he or she has asked. So anybody who asks critical questions regarding life or the universe and then provide rational answers to those questions, that person can be considered a philosopher. So with that definition of who a philosopher is, the question now is, were the sophists a philosopher? So from that definition, we can determine if they were actually philosophers or if they can be considered philosophers. Now, so were the sophists asking critical questions about the universe? And did they provide rational answers to these questions? Yes, they did. Now, one of the most important aspects which actually characterizes or gives one of the characteristics of a sophist, was that of the concept of knowledge. The concept of knowledge. Now, the sophists asked questions about knowledge, whether or not knowledge is attainable, whether or not human beings have the capacity, human beings were built to obtain or attain knowledge. And not just any kind of knowledge, knowledge that is true and certain. So they were asking questions. They asked critical questions about knowledge, epistemology, whether or not human beings could obtain or attain true and certain knowledge. And then they provided answers. Now, pertaining to this question of whether or not human beings are capable of obtaining that category of knowledge, that kind of knowledge which they refer to as true and certain knowledge, that is a kind of knowledge that is indubitable, that cannot be called to doubt. So they were asking questions if human beings are capable to attain that kind of knowledge. And the answer that they gave to that question was no. And that is the reason why the sophists were referred to as skeptics. Skeptics, what were they skeptical about? They were skeptical about man's capacity to obtain knowledge that is true and certain. They thought that was impossible. Now, Protagoras even went to the extent of giving two reasons why he thinks that human beings do not have what it takes. Human beings were not built with the capacity to obtain knowledge that is true and certain. He gave two reasons. And the first reason was the obscurity of the subject. And when we talk about the subject here, we are referring to the subject of true and certain knowledge. So he says that the subject, true and certain knowledge, is obscure. And when we say something is obscure, it means that it's not clear. There is some sort of like a veil covering it. So in order for you to actually know what it is, you have to unveil it. So he says that the subject, true and certain knowledge, is obscure. That is, nobody knows exactly what true and certain knowledge is. Nobody can actually identify that this is true and certain knowledge. This is knowledge that is true and certain. So it's obscure. Now, for a human being or for humans to actually know what this knowledge is and what characterizes knowledge that is true and certain, they need to remove the obscurity. They need to take away the obscurity. Now, which brings us to his second reason. Now, first reason, the subject is obscure. Second reason, the shortness of human life. Now, he says that these are the two reasons that are working to make sure that human beings, or that gave him the idea or the notion that human beings cannot obtain true and certain knowledge. That the subject, true and certain knowledge, is obscure. So, for us to know what actually it is, we need to remove the obscurity. We need to unveil it and then see it, and then we will be able now to obtain it. Because you cannot obtain something that you don't know how it looks like. For example, they just ask you to go into a room and bring me something. Your father just says, go into a room and bring me something. Now, if you get into that room, you don't know what your father have asked you to bring. So certainly you will not know what to bring. So it's just the same with true and certain knowledge according to Protagoras. So it's obscure. So for you to know what it actually is before you start searching or before you start the process of obtaining it, you must unveil it. And now the process of unveiling and seeing the true nature of true and certain knowledge, or of knowledge that is true and certain, and then finally engage in the process of obtaining it, Human beings are cut short. Their lives are cut short. Shortness of human life. So, according to him, those were the two reasons why human beings cannot obtain true and certain knowledge. So, it goes a long way to justify the fact that these guys actually asked questions about life and about aspects of life, and they provided answers to these questions. That therefore makes them philosophers. Now, on the other hand, what therefore what justification can we give to prove that these guys were not philosophers? Now, this will this justification to prove that these guys were not philosophers will be based on a comparative analysis between them and either later philosophers or early philosophers. We'll compare them with philosophers that came before them and philosophers that came after them. So we can actually do a comparative analysis with them. And also, we can actually identify some of the traits of early philosophers and later philosophers. And when I talk about early philosophers, I'm referring to the pre-Socratic philosophers, the Thales and the rest. And when I talk about later philosophers, I'm referring to Socrates most especially. So when you look at the Sophists, one thing about them that can make us start doubting if they were philosophers or not was the fact that they were giving out knowledge in exchange for money. They were giving out knowledge in exchange for money. Now, if you look at the early philosophers, none of them exchanged knowledge for money. None of them gave out knowledge for money. If you look at philosophers that came after Sophists, after the Sophists, let's talk about Socrates, for example. He did not give knowledge in exchange for money. So it makes us to believe that one of the philosophical traits or one of the characteristics that you will see in a philosopher is the aspect of being selfless. That is, you don't think about yourself. You don't think about your personal gains. You think about the betterment of others. You think about the possibility of improving others, improving the minds of others. But now, if you look at the Sophists, their interest was to enrich themselves. And that is why they were moving about in Greece, teaching, entering into disputations, into arguments, gathering the crowds, and then gaining students. And when they gain students, these students have to pay in order for them to be taught by these guys. So you see that their goal was not to transmit knowledge for the purpose of transmitting knowledge. Their goal was to transmit knowledge for the sole purpose or primary goal or purpose of obtaining money. And if you look at early philosophers, Thales, Anaximander, and the rest, okay, Thales was a teacher of Anaximander. Now, there were no accounts of Thales demanding fee from Anaximander. Socrates was also a teacher. He was out there to teach the Athenian youths. But never a day were we told that Socrates demanded for money. The man was actually a poor man. He was a poor man. So the Sophists were not selfless. They were out for their own interest rather than for the interest of the people rather than for the interest, the goal of developing knowledge or passing across knowledge from one generation to another. So that singular aspect makes it clear that the sophists, to an extent, cannot be considered as philosophers. So, my dear students, this is academic battleground. If you have or you've come across any question that gives you problems when it comes to interpretation, you will just drop it at the comment section. You give the question and the year that the question was given in the Cameroon GCE, and we are going to make a video to give you an interpretation of this question, and bet you it is going to help you enormously when you'll be facing the GCE in your own session.